Tesla economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. Don't worry, you won't be disappointed. I'm actually serious. I think I've discovered something big about Tesla, and it's starting to make so much sense to me. I think Tesla is about to make a step change with their entire auto business, and just in the next 2 years. I think there's a chance that once again we have all underestimated the potential of this company, at least in the near future. I think a lot of these missions can come into fruition earlier than we're expecting. However, I don't think it will be where everyone's looking. According to my research, Indonesia could supply Tesla with not far off enough nickel for 20 million cars a year. Perhaps within a few years, when the energy density has improved. Indonesia is a commodity-rich country, but so are its neighbours, like the Philippines and Australia. This is a great part of the world for Tesla to build cars. But I've already discussed the advantages of Tesla in Indonesia. Now I want to move on to the advantages of Indonesia with Tesla, as that might be the real opportunity right under our noses. Elon talks about sourcing local ingredients, manufacturing locally to, well, the local customer base. A factory on every continent to be nearer customers. It saves in shipping and cuts tariffs. But Indonesians aren't likely to be able to afford these $60,000 Teslas. Yes, we've mentioned this could very well be the export hub, and I still believe that it is a likely scenario, except I believe on top of, well, something that's gotten me super excited, and I think it's actually starting to blow my mind. It may even feel obvious to you as I tell you. Everyone I've told so far agrees it makes so much sense and makes this company even more exciting. So what is it? Indonesia is the local market. It has an enormous population, the 4th most populated country on the planet even. Lots and lots of customers there. So what am I implying? A compact $25,000 vehicle to be sold there? As it wouldn't cannibalize the other segments due to Model 3 and Model Y likely not affordable to so many there, and a low-cost model would be ideal for this market segment. No, Indonesia is going to make the dedicated robotaxi, and it's going to launch there too. I initially thought the dedicated robotaxi will be designed more oriented around the comfort and safety of a single passenger, due to 80% of fares likely being single passenger fares, because I initially thought the robotaxi market was first going to be in the US. Elon said volume production of robotaxi in 2024. But what about regulation? How will Tesla get past 50 states of regulation to allow driverless cars around on the roads all day? I don't think those timelines fit. Therefore, robotaxi will not launch in the US first, and therefore this dedicated robotaxi will be designed for the appropriate markets. Tesla are designing a dedicated robotaxi with no pedals or steering wheel, although that's what we're told. But I think a more literal description would be a dedicated robo-bus. A lot of people seem to think that the robotaxi is going to be designed to be built at a very low cost, but I disagree. I think extra money should be spent on it to further improve application. The overall cost of the vehicle is basically negligible per mile when you get down to it anyway. Overseas, many nations have much less issues with personal space compared to the US. I think it's likely a privilege we get in developed nations. My point is that although you may not feel comfortable carpooling in a robotaxi with strangers, other cultures will accept that, especially if it's a significant upgrade from the alternative and lower cost too. Therefore, the dedicated robotaxi will end up being more of a minibus, perhaps 8 to 10 seats. They'll be designed for pooling. Therefore, in theory, each robotaxi trip could mean 10 times fewer vehicles on the road for that trip. These buses may actually be able to cater to even 16 people perhaps in rush hour if people are allowed to stand too. Perhaps additional capacity for busy times could do wonders for traffic bottlenecks. Yeah, it's a great idea, but is it realistic? Think of adding the charging infrastructure there. That's not going to be feasible. Well, these are robotaxis, not privately owned by Tesla drivers doing long distance driving. Also, not to mention, these vehicles are likely not driving many miles each day due to all the congestion, and a battery should last throughout the entire day's fares. Yeah, but then the cars need to go and dock in a car park at night, and presumably these robotaxis are all Tesla owned and not owned by local Indonesians participating in the robotaxi network. Well, as I've mentioned before, I think that Tesla need a similar business model as Lime scooters for robotaxis. Even if the general public don't own the robotaxi, well, there's nothing to stop Tesla hiring them to manage the vehicles. Once the robotaxi is finished for the day, it can return to a local's house, on which it can be inspected, cleaned, and recharged for the next day. In turn, Tesla then pays the locals for this work. Of course, in Indonesia, this cost could be significantly less than the US, due to the lower cost of labour relative to gas prices. The thing is, the opportunity cost of transport is somewhat a global price, as we have global prices of oil. In fact, in Indonesia, vehicles are less fuel efficient too, and there's more traffic on the roads. So a cost of travelling a mile is possibly greater in Indonesia than in the US. If that was the case alone, then a single passenger robotaxi should, in theory, be a lower cost form of transport, implying that Indonesians could even justify paying more for robotaxi than an American. But then we get into carpooling. Perhaps the average capacity of these robo-bus taxis is perhaps 6 people, whereas a robotaxi in the US might average 1.2 people per fare. 5 times as many people with similar opportunity costs in gas bills. Well, do you see? Tesla stands to make potentially 5 times more profit per robotaxi in Indonesia than the US. Oh wait, 5 times more profit? Well, that would be if Tesla charged the same for a single robotaxi as each passenger. What we expect Tesla to do here is reduce the cost of robotaxis significantly. Now, robotaxis already being a low-cost form of transport, but with pooling, perhaps Tesla reduced the cost to 1/4 of a regular robotaxi fare, thus making it competitive with local subsidized public transport. So Tesla can offer lower cost transport in Indonesia than they can in the US, and end up making more profit per robotaxi too, believe it or not. And with over 250 million people, there isn't going to be a shortage of people wanting a safer, more convenient, comfortable, luxurious, lower cost form of transport. No, there should be a few, hopefully. But in these scenarios, it's always best to play it back to Tesla's mission and make sure it checks out. Robotaxi starting in Indonesia instead of the US. Is that good for the mission? Right. Well, what's happening here? Instead of replacing a modern, fuel-efficient car in America, we are now replacing dozens of old, not fuel-efficient, likely high-polluting cars for every robotaxi. Now, if you ask me, this tracks the mission perfectly. Why would Tesla spend so much effort on trying to replace vehicles in the US or developed nations? Vehicles in the US probably already have about 25 mpg or whatever. They are strict on emissions, unlike poorer countries who simply can't afford the luxury. However, these nations are now able to leapfrog an entire evolution of transport and go straight to the robotaxi. But there will still be regulation to get around. What if robotaxis hit people and result in injury or death? Yes, that is the worry. Protect your citizens' lives, but not at any cost whatsoever. There are certain balances within the economy. Government can only afford to regulate so much. The less money, the less regulation. But Indonesia have major health issues already. In Jakarta alone, 7,000 people a year die of air pollution. In fact, pollution is a really serious health problem for Indonesia. If the government was seen to be doing something about that, then that would definitely be in their favour with the citizens. The point I'm trying to make is there is a balance to citizens' health in that if Indonesia used more robotaxis, perhaps there may be an increase in vehicle fatalities, but it should be negligible relative to the lives saved and health benefits of the rest of the population due to the reduction in pollution. Of course, we expect these robotaxis to actually reduce road fatalities too. My point is that this government in Indonesia can be more risky with this technology as they have a lot more to gain. Also, if you have a dozen passengers in one vehicle, it will reduce congestion, which is another major issue in Indonesia. On top of that, the Indonesian government are simply elated to have Elon and Tesla there, and will likely do what they can in order to facilitate robotaxi regulation. They may even go one step further and stop their public buses and perhaps offer some citizens robotaxi credits instead. They'll also be proud that these robotaxis are made domestically. But what about FSD? It's pretty much there in the US already. It's the US data that Tesla have been collecting the most. Therefore, robotaxis are likely better off first in the US. Sure, but after thinking more through this, it doesn't align with the mission. I think US will get FSD earlier, but robotaxis probably aren't that big a deal in the US compared to the rest of the world, especially if they're for single passenger use for the vast majority of the time. And I think when the US does get robotaxis, then it will probably be privately owned Model Ys and 3s. There's no point having a dedicated robotaxi that can seat 10 people in a nation where only one person will use it at a time. Alright, it's super exciting. It feels like a step change to the mission. But what is this going to do to the stock price? How much income are these robotaxis going to generate? Well, that sounds like it's a big enough topic for another time. I'm sure you all want to know as much as me, but something tells me we are approaching the nutty number territory. We're far from finished on this subject. It's the most exciting potential I've seen for the company and could seriously add some multiples onto the stock price. It makes perfect sense for the mission to replace as many of the most polluting cars first. With this in mind, it might be similar to how we see Tesla's energy deployed first too, replacing energy for homes whose main source are diesel with solar. having a much bigger impact on global warming, it would also appear that whatever is best for the mission happens to also be best for the stock price, which makes sense, as the more fossil fuels we are able to replace, then the more valuable the products become. If you're not happy about this future for Tesla, then ask yourself why. Are you looking at this as a consumer and upset that you won't get your robotaxi soon, or your $25,000 Tesla? Tesla is not a consumer-oriented company making products just because their market research told them. Tesla is setting out a very big mission. We just happen to be lucky enough that some of it involves us getting some really cool products. Make no mistake, this could be massive, so much so that if you had a deal like this sorted, then you might feel comfortable enough to start all sorts of controversy. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.